Hello, I'm Patricia Raskin, and today I am talking with Rabbi Wayne Franklin, who was the senior rabbi for 38 years at Temple Emanu-El and has been the senior rabbi emeritus for the past 5 years at Temple Emanu-El. Welcome, Rabbi Franklin.
Hi, Patricia. It's nice to be with you today.
Too. How has the role of the rabbi evolved over the past century, and what do you see as its most significant changes?
Huh. Uh, Technology is one of the ways that a rabbi's world and a synagogue's world has changed significantly. Um, Before I came here, it's my understanding that Friday nights were a major event at Temple Emanu-El. Sometimes there were gatherings, I'm told, of 500 people on a Friday night. It was a major event each week for people. So you had large attendance. The cantors sang. There was a choir. The organ played, and it was a major event in people's lives. It was part of the rhythm of people's lives. And I understand that often after services, people would go to various homes and have refreshments and talk, and it was a very social evening. Uh, that was already changing when I came here, but we still did have the large Friday night services. But by the time I came in '81, Shabbat morning had already become the more major service. Friday nights, we still had cantor choir and organ, although over the years, as fewer people came to those programs, those services, that began to diminish. And so one by one, different aspects of that formal uh, high synagogue style was eliminated until we cut out the late Friday night service altogether and began having just a late afternoon, early evening minyan on Friday evening. They had always had a Erev Shabbat minyan, but it was a very small kind of thing. So that was a big change, and so Shabbat morning remains the primary service of the congregation.
Mm. If you look over, and I mean, you're talking about the last 38 years, the change, but now let's look at the past 100 years because now we have the centennial coming up.
Mhm.
What are some key milestones that you think have happened in Jewish history that have kind of shaped our approach to rabbinical leadership?
I think that some of the major events in Jewish history have been very influential. Certainly, the Holocaust was effective. I wasn't here, obviously, but I know that the temple raised money for an airplane during the war to help with the war effort. Um, Certainly, there were refugees from Europe who arrived in Providence and became part of the congregation. Later, after the war was over, there were survivors of the Holocaust who came, and that added another population and more stories and experiences, and that became part of the life of the congregation. Although, as I understand, there was not always a smooth reception of the newcomers. It took some time, and there were some issues of welcoming and integrating, but that I think got resolved over time.
Hmm.
Uh, I think the establishment of the state of Israel was very powerfully important in the life of the synagogue.
Mm.
In my own life, I remember distinctly uh, the war in '67. I remember sitting for an exam, an oral exam with my professor at seminary, because I was at JTS at the time in rabbinical school. I remember sitting with my professor. It was a week or two before the outbreak of the '67 war, and you could see the buildup already, the anticipation, the marshaling of forces by the Egyptians and others, and it just felt like calamity was in the air, and that we were studying Jeremiah, and Jeremiah prophesied and lived through the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE. And I just had this feeling of dread, like this was going to happen all over again, and so many people did. And then with the incredible victory, and then the following year I was studying from 68, 69 in Jerusalem, and it was like a whole new world, whole different attitude
Mm.
and a different mindset that affected the attitude of Jews all around the world, and certainly in Providence as well, much
Mm.
more positive. Although there was still when I was involved in the Community Relations Council at the Federation, uh, predecessor to the Alliance, I remember that there were still some of the old timers who had the attitude of don't make waves, don't push too hard, the shosh still as they used to refer to it.
Mm.
Um, the
So,
Russian Jewry movement was also powerfully important through my years in the rabbinate and the life of the congregation in terms of marshaling funds, having demonstrations, and a delegation of us went to Russia.
mm, mm. So there's a lot. Can you share one, you could share many, but memorable experiences or stories from your time serving as the rabbi that encapsulates what you think is the spirit of Temple Emanu-El?
Well, yes, there are a few things. Um, One of the things that we did was we created a number of years ago a project called Community of Caring, where we tried to reach out to members of the congregation who needed support in a variety of ways and wanted to offer uh, staff members and volunteer members of the congregation to be able to help people in their homes, to help drive people, to provide foods when necessary. Through it we developed a minyan crew to help with Shiva minyanim. And one of the things that we did was to have for several years on Christmas Day, when people are free and not doing anything, right? To have a cooking day at the temple. Actually, Anne had been one of the co-chairs of that project, and we would have 70, 80 people for hours on end in the meeting house kitchen and in the meeting house proper,
Right.
uh, cooking, packaging, preparing foods
Mm.
that we then froze. And if somebody was sick or somebody was um, had a baby or
Mhm.
whatever the situation might have been, and needed some food support and things like this, we could just go to the freezer, and somebody would take it over and help the family uh, with provisions like this.
This ties into your ecumenical work at Temple Emanu-El. Let's talk about this. It wasn't just about the Jewish community, it was about the community in Providence as a whole,
Well,
correct?
that's a different subject. I mean, this that was internal within the congregation. The interfaith work, yes, has also been very important to me, and I think um, eh, important to the congregation as well. And shortly after I came here, I was asked by members of the congregation if I would be willing to meet with a particular Catholic priest who had been raised in Providence, but had lived most of his professional life away from here and had been involved heavily in interfaith activities on the national level. Um, and I said, I'd be interested. Who is this person? And I was told it was Father Edward Flannery.
Mm.
Edward Flannery was a giant in the interfaith world. He had written a pioneering book on Christian anti-Semitism. It's called The Anguish of the Jews. It had been published in about 65, and I read it when I was in seminary. And I mean, he was a giant of a leader. I mean, he really was. And the opportunity to meet him was great privilege. And once we met, we agreed to co-chair a rabbis and priests dialogue in Providence. We met monthly The family who had introduced me to him sponsored lunches for all those years. And we met at Temple Emanu-El, and we had a good contingent of rabbis and of local priests who met together and talked about a whole variety of issues.
Well, one of the other committees that has been a very strong part of your work as a leader, as a rabbi at Temple Emanu-El, has been your dedication to Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust commemoration, and creating that committee. Talk about that.
Yeah, that interestingly came out of a conversation with a local Presbyterian minister. I was friendly with the minister at the Presbyterian Church on Hope Street, just a couple of blocks from the temple. We had both we're both about the same age when we arrived here, and we're having coffee one day, and he said, "I have been accustomed to having a Yom HaShoah commemoration on the Sunday closest to Yom HaShoah with my congregation. What about we doing something together with our two congregations?" And I said, "I'll go you one better," because I was already involved with Father Flannery. I said, "Why don't you organize the Council of Churches, and I'll organize the Board of Rabbis, and I'll also talk to Father Flannery and get the Catholic Church involved. Let's have a statewide interfaith
Mm.
event, not just our two congregations." So that's what we did. And
For
so we,
many years, for
for
many
many,
years.
well, 35 years ago.
Wow, that's fabulous.
So yeah, we had senior leadership of all the denominations coming together, the bishops and senior clergy, and it was the response of the various leaders was very positive and enthusiastic, and we had large crowds of attendance. And as things continued to develop, there was an ongoing interest from various sectors of the community. Some people dropped out, other people came involved, and a person named Patricia Raskin always came with excellent ideas for programs, for
Yeah,
which I was always grateful as the program developed.
thank you. Well, it was
The
a
shape of it
wonderful,
changed each year.
it did, and it was wonderful, has been a wonderful experience just to meet all these incredible people who share their stories so that
Mm,
we never forget, as we've said.
right.
And speaking of that, as we celebrate this centennial celebration and this milestone, what aspects of Jewish tradition and values do you believe are essential to preserve our future generations and so that we never forget?
Well, I think the bedrock has to be quality Jewish education in whatever form is possible, whether it's teaching in the synagogue, whether it's teaching in classes, whether it's teaching in chavurot or small groups or online programs. I mean, Jewish education is just critical, and it's distressing that still even today so few people really understand what this tradition is all about. Um, and I mean, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. But I think that that's one of the essentials.
Yeah.
And
That was going to be a question is, what are the most pressing challenges facing our Jewish community today? And what can we do? How can we address them? What is the hope for Judaism and the aspiration?
well, the hope for there's a lot of questions there, Patricia. Um, again, I think that we have to be creative in terms of how we attract people to education. I mean, one of the things that I tried to do was to provide multiple points of entry for people with different interests, different skills. Um, some people would come to services, some people would come to a class, some people would come to a study group, some people would come to work in the kitchen. So, so all kinds of different ways that people would come and become involved. And hopefully one thing would lead to the other thing, but not always. So there are multiple constituencies within the congregation. I think within all congregations, certainly congregations of our size. And there has to be something for everybody. And that's very challenging. Going back to one of your earlier questions, in the earlier days of the congregation, there was a kind of set program. There was the late Friday night service, and then they would have an adult institute, but that was usually lectures, some classes, and people would come, and that was it, you know. Um, and we have a much more multifaceted congregation where people want different types of services and different kinds of educational experiences, and it's been necessary to provide all that, because if you don't cater to people's specific needs and interests, they won't be there. So I mean, that's very challenging. It really is, but it's also very exciting. I think another challenge that we're very keenly aware of at this point is the resurgence of anti-Semitism, which is very troubling. And I don't know what the resolution is, although I would have hoped that the kind of interfaith work that I've done and many others throughout the country have done would be effective in moderating this, and it has. There are a lot of people in all the communities who aren't touched by this work. I mean, it's something that we in the Jewish community, when we're in dialogue with our Catholic or Protestant partners, are aware that even though leadership is involved, the members of the various congregations aren't always getting those messages.
Mhm.
What do you talk about when you're in front of your congregation? That there's so many things for us and for our non-Jewish partners. And so this isn't always the top subject, but it's an underlying issue that critically needs to be addressed. And it can't be done by heavy-handed government intervention.
I think you're saying it's grassroots. It's really what you did in reaching out within the community.
Right. And we had some grassroots experiences. I remember one program a series of programs that emerged from a relationship that I had with Reverend Maria de Carvalho, who at the time was the dean of the Episcopal Cathedral on North Main Street. She called me up and asked if I would like to do a joint project with her congregation and ours, to visit each congregation, to visit with them on a Sunday for services, and then talk about what we experienced, and for them to come to us on Shabbat and then have Shabbat dinner together, talk about what they experienced, and also go to Harvard Divinity School to hear a lecture by a Jewish professor who's an expert in Christianity, which we did. And so this led to a series of meetings between our two congregations, the people who self-selected to attend this. And it was very rich and very stimulating. But again, it was a smaller segment, but people who came benefited. So you have to
Rabbi,
build step by step.
here's a question that is not a prepared question, but I was thinking about it. And that is, when you think about everything you've taught, all of the Jewish literature and the wisdom and the Torah, what do you think is a real principle of Judaism that you think is absolutely our foundation and that we need to always keep in mind? There are many, but think of one.
I think the principle of kvod habriot, respect for the honor of every human being, cherishing each person as a creation of God and respecting that person because they are that, recognizing that we are all fundamentally brothers and sisters, that we are fundamentally the same and equal. And that applies to religion, it applies to race, it applies to sexuality, nationality, everything. We too often get hung up on minor issues, on divisions that tear us apart. And we need to be able to look at the larger issues the more the more fundamental aspects of what our tradition teaches and what we really believe in that I think can and should bind us all together.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Franklin. This was very inspirational, and thank you for your
Thank
time.
you, Tricia. The pleasure.